to begin with, the first thing I want to address here when it comes to romance is that um, the whole concept of romantic love is very modern. This will surprise a lot of you that this whole romance, when we talk about being romantic, um, being, I'm going to get into some of the things that we do that we consider as romantic. But what I want you to know is that the whole concept of romantic love is a very new thing. Let's go back a little bit and look at some of this. So, the African is familiar with traditional relationship, and this is how it's been for several years. Love and marriage has also evolved over the years. So think of even in biblical times or several years, even 200-300 years ago in America, there were no cars. People got around on horses and various ways. There were boats, but usually people get around on horses. The first car was developed at the end of the last century, the previous century, so getting to the end of the 1800s. That's when the first car was developed. So Henry Ford came around early 1900s and we had the first car. So today, if I tell you go somewhere and get on a horse and go to New York, you would think I'm asking you to do something very strange, And the same way, when you are asked to do something that you're not comfortable with, or whether it's something new that you've been asked to drive, or let me put it this way. Back then, if you had asked somebody to drive a car, they would say, "What is this? What am I supposed to do with this?" Because they are not very familiar with cars. So think of it this way, that romantic love is a new thing. So I know somebody will ask the question, why is it new? People have been marrying for so many years. What we need to understand is that for many years ago, relationships was for survival. It wasn't for romance. So it's a totally different reason why people got married. For survival and productivity. So survival means they had a lot of children. And I remember even growing up in Ghana, the way my grandparents used to say, people will have a lot of children so that, God forbid, if some of the children passed, they will have some still surviving. And there were reasons why we did things. That was one. And the second two was productivity. Because if you worked on a farm and you needed people to work, there were no laborers to work back then. So it means that your family will be working on the land, So those were some of the reasons. There could be other reasons too. But for this discussion, I'm going to stay with these two discussions. And then another reason also is that in most societies, when people had children, in addition to, the children working on the land, their sons could go for war to represent the family. Because if you look at even Chinese culture, African culture, even the Israelites in biblical terms, when there's war, every family has to provide a male to go and fight. I remember I came to America, I was 24 years old, and when I got here, I got a letter in the mail that I'm below 25, so I was signed up for what they call selective service, meaning that, and I said, what is selective service? They say if there's war and they need people to fight, they'll give me a gun and I have to go and fight. And what I came to understand is that if you are a male born in America from 18 to 25, you have to get on that list. And the moment you turn 25, you come off that list. And when I came, I was 24, so I was on for 1 year. And the same thing applied back then, where their sons went to war. So that was one of the reasons why back then people had got married, came together. There were other reasons, and I call it survival and productivity. So another thing also is that back then, when you had men, they worked on the land, they went to war. If you had women, they worked at home. And also, if somebody came to marry your daughter, it means that you get the bride price, you get the cow, you get all that gift. There was a reward attached to that. And that was the norm. That was what was done back then, So let's have all these things in mind, And all the things that I'm describing here, we can find elements of this in the Bible, as some of the traditions that we see in the Bible, how marriage happened. Now, the first place that I found, and I know Bible scholars might have more places they found, but based on my research, the first place I found where romantic love. Now, if you look through the Bible, it talks about romantic love, but not in clear and explicit terms. The first place where the Bible clearly talks about love and relationship in romantic ways was the Songs of Solomon, or the Songs of Songs. If you read that book, you'll come back and ask me, is all of that in the Bible? And the answer is that yes, it is in the Bible. It is very romantic. It describes not just romantic love, but it talks about even romantic acts and, intimacy and songs of love and desire and passion. It's quite amazing how the whole book was put together. And just to give you a little bit of a background here, I've read the whole Songs of Solomon. And when you read it, at some point, it gets a little bit confusing. It sounds like there are three people in love when you read it. But I got online to do some research and found a British Bible scholar who explained it to me, explained it in a video where I clearly understood what was going on. And what was happening is that it was King Solomon. He was the king of Israel. He was in Jerusalem. That was the seat of government where the king was. And every summer, he would go to the countryside. Think of you living in Accra, or you live in Maryland, and you have a vacation home. That's maybe in Ghana, you have a vacation home at maybe somewhere in Kwewu or Kumasi somewhere. And so every summer you go over there. So if I liken this to the US, let's say you live in Maryland and you have a vacation home in Florida. So during the summer you go there. So what happened is that when the king went there, he had a house there, he had farms there, and people who worked on the farm. So according to the illustration, when the king went to the land to work on the farm, he fell in love with one of the girls who worked on the farm. And this romantic love happened. Now, this is what's interesting. Because back then there were no TVs, a lot of people didn't know how the king looked like. So this girl was in love with the king and did not know. So he was, at some point, he'll be talking about the king. At some point, he'll be talking about the man he fell in love with. And so it felt like he was talking to two different people, but it was the same person, And the story goes on to talk about how, if you look, there are evidence where she talks about how when she came, the king came, and how she adorned her with, beautiful things and lovely things. And then there was a point where the king came with his caravan to the vineyard, and she found out that she's in love with the king. Of course, back then, the king had multiple wives too. So the king took her to the palace, and they talk about how because she worked in the sun, her body was tan. It's quite interesting when you get into it. But that's not the purpose of our discussion today. I just wanted to highlight the romance the Songs of Solomon talks about. Is quite in-depth, It's a very, very romantic book. So when this was introduced to us, and again, even the story of Adam and Eve is romantic in its own place, except that it doesn't mention romantic elements as the Songs of Solomon does, So romance was introduced to us in the Bible. It was introduced to us in the Middle Ages. This is back maybe Middle Ages is somewhere, the 1600s when, I can't recollect exactly when books like, Macbeth was written. What's the name of the guy who wrote Macbeth? Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote his books on romantic love as well. So coming forward to our day today, we live in societies where we understand what romantic love is, but not every society thrives on romantic love. The idea that when I meet somebody is for survival, it's for we raising a home, me taking care of my family, it still persists in so many communities around the world. It's in the West, the US and England. That's where romantic love thrives a bit. The whole idea of Valentine started in the US. It's a commercial thing actually. It's a way that businesses use to sell more things, to sell chocolate. They say even Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus because the first pictures of Santa Claus showed him with a bottle of Coke. So I'm not going to get into all of that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that romantic love is new. And one of the things that I found is that romantic love, even though it's new because the society we live in today has also changed. It's not the same as it was years ago when they married for survival and productivity. So much has changed. So marriage has also evolved with it. And you also have to realize that back then, one person married multiple wives. In our organized society today, we don't do that because of all the issues with legal issues that come with it and your ability to sustain, multiple wives because you don't have a farm. You don't need multiple wives in order to sustain a whole community. So all of these factors play into it. So the reason for us, having romantic relationship means that certain other things have changed. Now we find ourselves with our spouses for long period of time. Talk about COVID. COVID revealed so many things about relationship because couples found themselves just by themselves, And if you were not doing romantic things, you were not being proactive, it showed all the frustrations that were building in the relationship. There's a reason for that. Think of many years ago, if there were farms, they would go work all day, they come home, have dinner, talk to their wives a little bit, and they go to bed. But today, we spend all this time with one person, and it creates that environment where we, as human beings, we want more of certain things. And then another thing too that I want to talk about too is that we know more of ourselves, through knowledge, through science, through psychology. We understand ourselves better than many years ago, so that in understanding ourselves means that we know what we want, and then another thing too that I'll talk about is the things that we see, when you read Psalms, the book of Psalms, David will explain the lilies of the valleys and mountains and all these beautiful things in nature, and when you go back to even the Adam and Eve, when Bible says that Adam, when God created Adam, God told him to name the animals. And when he was naming the animals, he realized that the animals came in pairs, but he was by himself. That was an eye-opener. It was a revelation that came to him. And at that time, God said he's going to make him a helpmate. Now, another thing I also want to say whilst I'm on that is that if you realize carefully, the only time God brought another person into Adam's life was when he was busy doing the work God has given to him. And that work was naming the animals. So if we get ourselves busy with doing the work that God has given us, he will bring people into our lives that will help us grow in our relationships. So moving along, when we talk about romantic relationships, I mean, maybe we should define it. Romantic relationship basically is, the things that we do that spur on love and affection and desire, makes us love each other more. That's romantic relationship. Where you do something for your spouse, they do something for you. It can cover intimacy and sex, but usually when we talk about romantic relationship, is the things that we do that leads to intimacy and sex. So romantic love grows in a thriving community. So another thing, when there's no threat of war, there's no threat of starvation and all those things, our minds are free to roam and be creative, and that's where romance thrives. Romance thrives very well in such environment. Romantic love helps us to grow our relationship, because then it makes us adventurous. We want to know more about each other. We want to connect more. And romantic love also helps us to discover each other more. I tell couples all the time that there's so much about your spouse you don't know. That if you are married, there's so many things about your spouse. And I usually don't like comparing relationship to cars, but sometimes I will do that just to make a point. So my wife bought a car since 2019. And, we've had the car, we drive the car in and out. I remember when she first got it, I'll just go sit in the car and pick the manual and I'll be checking things out. After been driving the car for years, about 5 years after having the car, I found out the car could do certain things that I didn't even know existed. And how did I know? I knew because I took my time to find out, to explore certain things, to read the manual again, to go online and watch videos. And I realized, wow, this car has all these features on it. And I was telling my wife, somebody will buy a car, drive it for 15 years, and don't know that these features came with the car. And why am I likening this to a relationship? Because we don't take the time to pursue romance and love and affection and the desire to know each other. So there are certain things we'll never find out, So this is a very important part of our relationship. So again, going a little bit back, traditionally, the African man or woman is still in tune, or we are in tune with, being able to get into a relationship, provide what we need for our family. That is key. That's priority. So that's what we focus on a lot, So it does not mean that we are not capable of showing affection and love, but it's just that given what is going on, remember I say romantic love thrives it grows in a thriving relationship. So if you have work on your mind, you have a way of taking care of your family, romantic love won't come on your mind. But the truth is that we can learn. So when we say romantic love, what are some of the things that we do? It's something in the US they call public display of affection, PDA. And what are some of them? It's like sending flowers. There's a funny YouTube video I saw during Valentine. This lady wanted the husband to send her flowers so much, and husband wasn't getting the sign, so she bought the flowers herself. And when the husband got home, she gave the flowers to the husband and said, "Go out and bring it in and give it to me." So he gave, and I think he was an African man, excuse me, African guys, but he gave the flowers to the man. The man looked at it, he went out, dug a hole, and planted the flowers. I'm sure some of you might have seen this. That's just a joke. But the point here is that sending flowers, I know for some people it means a lot, some people it doesn't, but it's always a good gesture. It makes people feel good. When you go back into the Olympics, Athens, when the Olympic Games started, they used to give flowers to whoever won. It's a way of showing, commending people for what they've done. The next thing about romantic love that I'll also say is holding hands. We always talk about how you see a couple who have been married for 45, 50 years, walking in the street holding hands, and we all say it's nice. But what about young people too? It's something that we can do that will help, spare on romantic love. Another thing is kissing. A lot of us on this platform with our generation will say you never saw your parents kiss, but you knew they love each other. So that tells you it's a different era in which we live today. I was telling a gentleman who we were mentoring that the same way that when we were children, our parents didn't have to buy us cell phones. They didn't have to. But today we have to buy cell phones for our children, because of the society, which the same way, if you didn't see your parents' kiss, hug, buy flowers, today you do it because it helps. What could be said in favor of cell phones is the fact that, you're able to keep in touch with your children and all of that, even though it's other sides, Today, your child turns 15 and a half, you have to take them for driver's ed, teach them how to drive, get them a car. When we were growing up, that wasn't the case. I can't imagine my father going to my grandfather and say, buy me a car. He didn't even have a car himself, So this is one thing that has evolved that helps. Now, one other thing too is going on date nights, like, a couple going out, dress nicely, go to a restaurant, sit down and eat. It's something that my dad always wanted to eat at home. My mom will sit by. They had their date at home, and they didn't even see the point of going out to eat. But we go on date nights, So the point I want to put out here is that, are these things good for us? Yes, it is good for us because of our organized society we live in today. These things help sustain relationships. And another thing that we have to also know is that back then, people didn't live and marry as long as we are doing today. Life wasn't as long. People died early. Because of health, medical science has gotten so better today. So these are some of the things that we do today that will sustain the marriage for a longer time. Now, I also have to add that back then, people married early too. A lot of Bible scholars believe that when Mary got pregnant to have Jesus by the Holy Spirit, she was somewhere between 15 and 18 years old. I mean, you think about it today, it's like very young. But that was what was it back then, That was when they had their strength to be able to carry a family, raise a family, and take care of their home, So this is the big question. What happens if you feel your spouse is not romantic? It's a big question that we need to ask. So, or we can talk a lot about complaining about it, not be happy about it, but what do we do? So the first thing that I will say you should do is tell him or her what romance or romantic relationship means to you. Explain it to the person and say, I know that we all grew up in different, cultures, societies, and all that, but these things mean something to me, and explain it in a way that they will understand. Know how to receive romance. This is the other thing where I brought up that as much as sometimes we say African men don't know how to be romantic, sometimes African women also don't know how to receive the romance. There've been funny stories of African men getting flowers for their wives, and they'll say, "Oh, give me the money. I could have used the money for something else." So know how to also receive the romance or the gesture of love that's been presented to you. Just like you received Christ as your Lord and personal Savior, when love is being shown to you, you receive it. Some people feel nervous when affection is shown to them, and but you have to make sure you receive it so the person given the love doesn't feel hurt that the love was rejected. So learn to receive romantic love. Now talk about all of this at the beginning of your relationship and all the time. If you're in a relationship already, make sure every so often you bring these issues up, because what meant romance for another person wouldn't be. Let me give you an example. If you start dating and you buy chocolates and gifts and flowers for your wife, she'll be very happy. It's romantic. But think about it this way. Your wife just had a baby. It's 2 a.m. and the baby is crying. And you go out and buy flowers and bring it to her, do you think she'll be happy? No. At that time, what is romance is if you get up the next morning and say, sleep, I'm going to take a day off, or a Saturday, I'm going to take care of the child, get 2-3 hours sleep. That will be romantic to her. You see, so it evolves over time. So understand where you are in your relationship and what will be romantic. Spending time with your spouse when they really need it could be romantic. What we should avoid doing is complaining that I don't get romance and you are not romantic. Let's say what we want and not complain about it. And then also ask when you need it. You can say something like, our anniversary is coming, and this year I really want us to do something special. I would really love it if we can think of somewhere to go as a couple and spend a weekend. Maybe we'll call Auntie Joyce to plan a romantic trip for us to, go and spend some time somewhere to get to, rekindle our love, So it's all about you communicating about these things will help get you there. So let's make sure that we are not just leaving the issue as it is. So be grateful for whatever you have. That's the other thing too. So anytime that, you do something, your spouse does something for you that's romantic or helpful or makes you feel special, make sure you say thank you to them so that they are aware of it, so that they know that that really meant something to you, so that they can keep doing it. So these ideas is something I want you to start thinking about, that we learn. There's so many things that we can learn to make our relationships better. There's so many things that we can learn to grow our relationship. And romantic love is one of them. We live with it today. It's not going anywhere. And based on where you are, there are some couples, they are fine. They don't need romantic love. We both work. We do nice things for each other. There's the respect. There's love. We're good. But some people thrive on it. It helps their creativity. It helps their emotions. And another thing too that I want to say, that romantic love is actually good for our health. It's very good for our health because, scientists will tell you that there was a research my wife and I were looking at that couples who kiss every day, they found out that men who kiss their wives every day live 7 years longer. Can you imagine? And and they believe the reason is because when you kiss every day, you are calmer. It reduces your blood pressure so that, cardiovascular diseases and all of that are not an issue, So it has its place, You're more happier when you do, even the person doing the romantic gesture, you the person buying the flowers, you the person planning the romantic date night, you the person kissing, receiving the kiss or giving the kiss. It makes you happier, it gives you a positive spin on a view of life, and it gives you something to look forward to as well. So let's know that it has its place. It's a good thing. And if you are not the kind, it's okay. But also listen to your spouse. If you feel your spouse wants it or needs it, do what you can. And when your spouse is doing their best, also appreciate it and receive it. And when they do something for you, say thank you. Let that be something that you rejoice in, and make sure that we keep doing that so that we can all continue to grow in love and relationship. So this is an overview of what romantic love is, a little bit of a history about it, and also in terms of how things that we can do to show romantic love. Now, I must say this, that the last time I went to Ghana, I saw that people are very romantic in Ghana. I must tell you, Valentine's, people will play music or call and, request for music for their spouses, send flowers. And I think they even have a special name for it where they put this basket together with all these nice things and send it across the town to another person, So they have their own form of romantic love, and so find what works for you and do it. Now, let me ask you all a question. This probably might give it away, but do you all know fireflies? You know what a firefly is? Fireflies that fly in the spring. At nighttime, you see the lights flashing on the grass in the dark. Does anybody know why that light flashes? No. It's romance. The male don't have that light. It's the female bugs have that light. And when it's flashing, they are telling the men, I'm ready, come get me. Yes. Animals have a lot of romantic behavior. If you study those video I was watching some time ago, and I couldn't believe even birds singing. In springtime, when you hear birds singing, it's all romantic music. They're singing back and forth. Some are a call for help. Some are finding where their spouses or whatever is. But some of them are romantic songs they sing to each other. So every time you see a firefly, know that there's some serious romance going on there. Yes. So it's by our nature to be romantic. It's in us. So let's not see it as something negative. And then if you also think of anything to do romantic, do it, because it's going to help your spouse a lot. Yes. And then those of you with children, teach your children to be romantic. One thing that I do is we have two daughters in college. One is 18, the other is 21. Every Valentine, I send them chocolates until they meet their husbands. I'm going to keep doing it, as a way of teaching them that, romance is good. When you meet somebody, this is how they should treat you, and you learn. And so you're preparing them. And when they come home I go on dates with them. Sometimes I say, you want to call the younger one and say, do you want to go play bowling? We go bowling, and my older daughter will go to Panera Bread, sit down, eat, and chat. Just talk with them and find out things that are going. And it's amazing. They tell you so much, So prepare the next generation, by spending time. If you have a son, and you're a woman, take your son out and for a date so that he will learn how to treat women too. And it's all things they will pick up, and even the whole concept, because today that's what we do. Romantic love helps to relationships to grow and thrive. So thank you so much. I'm going to pause, and then we will take some questions if you do have some questions, and then we'll come back to the second part of this discussion today.